Hello everyone! Recently, I found myself wanting to make a simple Live2D model to get back into the habit of making them. Lately, my head has been full of Deltarune thanks to the recent chapters, so I decided to make a Live2D model of Noelle. My plan is to showcase as much of the process as I can so people can have a general look at my workflow. But just know that my workflow isn't perfect and there is a ton of readjusting and retracing my steps. This also is not a tutorial, so I won't be going into details of every little thing I do. However, I will likely mention some shortcuts or useful tips here and there. The process on the art will be a separate video, so please check that out either in the pop-up above or in the link in the description. When I first start a model, I import my previous settings for parameters and physics so I don't have to do it all by hand over and over again. I also select all the layers in the model and adjust the draw order for them so I can better organize the folders and parts. I have a video on how to understand draw order as well as one for how to bulk edit the draw order so you don't have to do it by hand like I used to. Next, I'm setting up the parts of the eye to make the blinking parameter. Recently, I've begun to create deformers for parts such as the lashes and eye white to use for the blinking rig instead of just using the art mesh itself. I found that this lets me have better control when it comes for the physics later. Here, I'm going into the mesh edit mode and I'm using the stroke mesh mapping to draw a mesh for the eye top. The eye top part goes through some pretty extreme manipulation sometimes in order to get the shapes for the blinking and the smiling, so I often do have to go back and readjust the mesh edit. I use the deform path tool to adjust and shape the eye top for the blinking. I'll adjust the shape and then go to the deformer for the eye white blink and squish it by holding the Alt key and dragging the top of the grid so that it hides behind the closed eye shape. I'll note as well that parts like the iris of the eye and the shadow are clipped onto the eye white mesh. Here I'm adjusting the position of the eyelash as the eye blinks. I always find this part to be a little tricky since I don't use glue to connect to the eye top part. However, I personally find it the ideal for my own workflow since I spend way more time fighting the glue than working with it. Since I'm not working from a proper reference for the specific art as some modelers do, I often go back and adjust the layout of certain things. Here I noticed that the length of the closed eye was a bit too long, so I went back and adjusted it. At this point, I felt like I didn't have complete control over the eye top mesh, so I went back into the mesh edit mode and added more points. It isn't always beneficial to add too many points arbitrarily, but usually after the first attempt, I get a better idea at how much more complex I need the mesh to be. And since I added way more points, I had to go back and redo the closed eye shape. Once again, I had to go back and readjust the lash position. The shocked wide eye expression can be triggered through tracking, but later on I figured it would be best to have it be available as a toggleable part as well, so I actually had to redo this part a little bit later. I added the under eye line to be used for certain expressions, so I'm making sure to rig it in as I go so I don't completely forget about it while I'm working on the eye area. I take a moment to add the lash physics, which are linked to whenever the eye blinks. I began to rig the iris XY physics, aka the looking around parameters, but I later had to adjust it since I made the eye not move far enough to the left, so it had come out looking a little odd once the other eye was rigged. Once I believe I have a fair closed eye shape, I begin to work on the smiled eye shape. It's the same process as doing the closed eye shape, but I do a lot of checking back and forth to make sure that the smiling eye transitions smooth enough from the closed eye shape. What I like to do to give the looking around a bit more life is to make the top and bottom of the eye move with the iris. You can think of it as if the iris is actually pushing on the sides and the top of the eye as it looks around. For this, I made a deformer that contains everything but the iris, and I rigged it straight on the eyeball XY parameters. If you really wanted to make it fancy, you could even rig it on its own parameter and link it to the X and Y through physics, but when working on something for fun, I like to keep it pretty simple. Here is where I had to redo the shocked eye expression. Based on some of Noelle's sprites, she has some where her irises are small and some where they're extra small. So my first instinct was to make a parameter that contained both the small and the extra small iris size. But from what I think was from improper deformer hierarchy, this ended up messing with the trackable small iris. I was unable to remedy it with blend shapes, so I ended up simplifying it and just doing a parameter that was only one of the small iris options, and then using blend shapes to make sure it didn't make the trackable shocked iris size super small. Now I wanted to work on the mad and sad eye forms. I had initially forgotten what this was called, so I just called it eye emotions, but the better and more proper name for this is eye forms. This part of the eye rigging process does take me a hot second, usually because changing the eye form will mess with the closed eye shape. To make sure it doesn't, I make the eye form be a blend shape parameter that turns itself off whenever the eye is closed. I also find it really easy to get lost during the process, so many times I will end up going back and restarting from scratch. And just like with the iris size parameter, my first instinct was to make the mad and sad eye forms be on the same exact parameter. Yet again, I found it harder to control with blend shapes, so I changed it so that the mad and sad eye forms were their own parameters. In this next part, while testing, I noticed that the eyeball XY stopped working whenever it was set to the trackable shocked expression. After fumbling around for a bit, I figured out that it was due to improper deformer hierarchy. This is what the hierarchy was when it didn't work, and this is what it was when I did finally get it to work. Once I'm done doing the modeling for the eye movement, I finally get started on the physics. Many people are likely familiar with the concept of the irises having a bouncy blinking physics, but did you know that you can also add physics to the entire eye for an extra kick? It's one of my favorite little details when rigging eyes. To put it simply, you create a parameter for stretch, horizontal, and one for squish, vertical, and you link it to the eye blinking parameter through physics. I create stretch and squish physics for both the iris itself and then also the entire eye, so that overall it gives this very bouncy final impression. Now I'm going over and making sure that the eye is properly rigged and I have all the forms and physics that I want. I'll then prepare the eye to be ready for duplication. Instead of rigging the other eye from scratch, I duplicate the fully rigged eye and reflect it to match the other eye. The process I personally do is create a deformer that contains the entire rigged eye, usually called something like all eye, then create a rotation deformer, usually also called something similar like all eye position, and then I will copy and paste the entire eye folder, meshes and deformers into a new folder. Then, with the duplicated part selected, I will right click and select flip. In the flip menu, I choose to reflect horizontally, and I also make sure to select the eyeball X in the parameters to reflect portion. If you don't select it, then the model will go cross-eyed when it looks from side to side. Once reflected, I test the eyes again. Like I mentioned earlier, I didn't rig the iris to go far enough when looking to the left, so I had to undo the duplication that I did and fix it. Once I fixed it, I went through the duplication and testing process once again. While I was there, I also did some minor adjustments to the blinking and smiling eye shape. And this is what the finished eyes look like. The next area to be rigged will be the eyebrows, and you'll be able to see the expressions come to life as we keep progressing through the parts of the face. Stay tuned for the next parts of the series as I rig the rest of the model. Thank you for watching, and I'll leave you with Noelle looking around, making various expressions. Bye bye!